In this video, I'll show you how to set up your t-shirt quilt to be quilted on your long arm quilting machine. I will go over marking your leaders with reference marks, loading the quilt onto the machine, and the actual quilting process. You may have floated some of your other quilts that you've made, but with a t-shirt quilt, I suggest that you don't float it. You're never going to be able to get it squared up really well. The t-shirt material is just too stretchy. But I've developed a system here that makes it really easy to get your quilt onto your machine and have it come out very nice every time. When you are quilting your quilt, the underlying grid that you made the quilt with will come into play. You will pin the quilt onto your leaders using this underlying grid as your reference. Remember, the quilts that you're making are based on that 4-inch grid. We're going to replicate that 4-inch grid along your leader bar. So we start with 2 pins, 2 different colors, and your ruler. What we're going to do is we're going to find the center of the leader, and then we're going to mark every 4 inches in one color, and then step in 2 inches and mark the opposite color. So I have my center already marked on my leader. I am using this on the leader that's for the quilt top. Once you find the center, grab your black pen, and you're going to mark every 4 inches going left and right. All right, so 4 inches, I mark, and then I mark. Go the opposite direction, 4 inches, 4 inches, and 4 inches. Next, grab your opposite color, and you're going to mark 2 inches either side of this mark. So I'm going to start at 0, and I'm going to mark 2 inches to the left and 2 inches to the right. Then I can just simply line my ruler up with the orange mark and go every 4 inches. So now that I've marked my leader for the quilt top, I also need to replicate those same marks on my take-up leader marked on. We already have these marks marked on. But I'm going to show you the opposite ones. The 2 inches off is going to be an orange. Now that you have your leaders marked, you're ready to go on and put your quilt top on. The first step to loading your quilt is to clip along the temporary binding at every seam intersection. You're just going to put a tiny little clip there. This clip will be lined up on one of the grid marks that we just made. After you finish getting the clips on the top and the bottom of your temporary binding, the next thing to do is find the center of your quilt. So simply fold from edge to edge. I'm going to actually line up my 2 corners perfectly. I'm not lining up the temporary binding, I'm lining up the actual corners of the quilt. And then simply pull across. Since I'm working on a grid, I'm either going to be on a 4-inch mark or on a 2-inch mark. And I can also look and see if the underlying grid is lined up. So these 2 can line up, and there will be the center of my quilt. Center of the quilt, I always put a little bit of V. That way I can distinguish that mark from the rest of the clip marks. Tiny little V. And I do that on the top and the bottom. Then you're ready to load your quilt top. So to load your quilt top's going to be face up. Going to line it up along the top. Got to find the center of the bottom also. Now you grab your top leader. Remember, you have 2 leaders here, and if you put it on the wrong leader, you'll figure it out really quick, and you have to unpin it, so really think about it. Sometimes I actually have written the word no on the back leader, so I don't put the top on it. But if you don't have any tick marks on this leader, you'll know not to use it. So here's my center of my leader. And there's the center of my quilt. I am going to line those 2 up and pin. Once you have your center on, look for your next clip mark. There's my next clip mark, and there's the closest tick mark on my leader to it. It's an orange one. So I simply pin that clip mark to the tick mark, So continue pinning just the clip marks on your leader. So now I have all my marks that I've clipped onto my leader. Next I go through and fill in. The clip marks will let you line up the actual t-shirt without worrying about the temporary binding. So you can see here, it's a little wavy. It's not going to just lie flat. That's fine. I find the center of that section, make sure it lies even, and I pin it. The first couple times you pin a quilt onto your quilt machine, your fingers will feel really dumb. But it takes practice and experience, so just keep working at it, and after a while it becomes second nature. So then continue pinning the rest of your quilt bottom onto its leader. As we're loading, you'll notice that we already have the pins in the canvas. We do that on both bottom leads, but on the top we'll put them on separately. All right, once you have your quilt top pinned on the bottom, it's time to roll it onto its bar. First, I start out by making it look nice and neat up at the top. I go along, I make sure all my pins are in, and it's looking like it's laying smoothly. So right here, we want to make sure that this temporary binding stays nice and even the whole way we wind it on. I don't want this to get way over like that or way like that. It needs to be nice and even. This is as far as I wind it on. Then I simply get it out of the way for the next step. The next step is to put our backing on the leader. Next, we're going to put our backing on our machine. Make sure you have found the center of the top and the bottom of your backing. So there's my center. So when you put your backing on, you want to make sure that your seam is facing up. It's very important. If you have your seam facing down, you'll have the seam on the outside of your quilt. So there's the little click mark for my center. I'm going to put that at 0. Now I don't simply start pinning and walk down from one side to the other. I actually pin every foot to 2 foot at this point and make sure it's lying flat, but I do that so that when I have it all pinned on, I can look really quickly and make sure that I have enough backing material. So I can look down and I have plenty of extra material on this end. Again, I can see that I have plenty of extra backing material. Now I can go back through and put the rest of the pins in. If you have 3 pieces of backing material and you know that you're barely going to go into the 3rd piece, you don't need to pin as much. But if you're using 2 pieces and you know that you're going to go right to the end of that 2nd piece of material, I would suggest that you pin every single one. I know on this quilt that I'm only going to go a little bit into that 3rd piece, so I'm not going to pin every single pin. All right, I have enough pins on that, so now I'm going to simply roll this onto my take-up bar. So I see my seam going along my bar, even all the way across. That's great. That means I have my material going on right. If the seam was not even and it was twisted, then you'd know that you're not rolling it on nice and flat. So that's it with the backing material. Next up, let's get our batting. Next, it's time for our batting. I use Hobbs 80/20. It's a great batting. It's not too thick, not too thin. First thing you do is you find the center. Fold it in half and simply clip a little clip with your scissors. You don't have to find both ends of your center because you're going to be using one that will be pinned on and one will just be at the bottom. But I always clip both just in case because I never know which end I'm going to grab. So now I'm going to unfold my batting. Simply kick it under my machine, and then the batting's going to come up in between my 2 bars here. So now I'm going to put the 3 layers together. Here is the center of my backing material, the center of my batting. You don't have to be perfect at this point. You're just trying to get the quilt assembled. And then I find the center of my quilt. And then I line them up. Then simply put a pin in the center so you don't have to redo that. Next, we're going to take our take-up leader. Everybody's quilt machine's a little bit different. On my leader, I always have to remember to see this bar. Sometimes I bring this in front and get myself in trouble. Pay attention as you're doing it, and it will go a lot easier. On this leader, I don't have any pins in it, so I have pins in a little box here, and I'll simply set them on here. All right, so there's my center, and there's the center of my take-up. I'm going to line them up and pin. Now it's very, very important as you're putting this on that this back piece of material is flat. You don't want any lumps, bumps, or wrinkles because that'll reflect in the back of your quilt. So I make sure the backing's nice and smooth. I make sure the batting's nice and smooth. Then I go to my clip and I use my thumb to mark where it is. Then I find my clip in my quilt top and bring it to the front of my thumb. And then I pin it on. Continue pinning left and right on your main clip marks. Now that you've pinned at your main intersections, now we need to go in and fill in between. As you'll notice, it's going to look a little roughly. It's not going to lie flat like the back does. That's okay, because we know it's 12 inches between here to here, and that's exactly where we want it to be. So now to do this, it's going to be very similar to how you pinned on the bottom. Continue on. Once you've pinned everything, make sure you pick up your extra pins. You want to be really careful not to get any pins caught between your layers. Now that I have it all pinned on, I'm going to roll this up. Take out this excess slack. I want to make sure that when I'm rolling it on, that my lead is nice and flat along the top too. If this lead is crumpled, your quilt won't lie flat. So this is about as far as I'll roll it up, and now I have to play with the quilt to get it to lie flat. First thing I want to do is to take up any excess slack in the backing material. Once you've taken up the excess slack, now lift up your quilt and you're going to fluff up your batting. Your batting's very sticky and it will hold your quilt flat, so it's really important to go through and fluff up your batting. Next, I want to make sure that I don't have any lumps or bumps in my batting. So I'm just going to use my hands to feel along the edge here and make sure that I don't have any lumps in my batting. You don't want to have a lump in your quilt. Next, you're going to play with the quilt top to get it lined up. Remember, we're working on a grid, both horizontal and vertical. Want to make sure our vertical lines run vertical and our horizontal lines run horizontal. So these two lines right here are on the same part of the grid. So I want to make sure that they're on the same part of this take-up bar. If this was way up like that and that was way down like this, you'd have a mess. Next, I need to decide what color thread I'm going to use for the quilting, and if I haven't decided at this point, I need to decide what color binding to use. At this point, I decide which binding I'm going to use and which thread color I'm going to use. To do that, I pull back the quilt. There's my backing color, and I've decided I'm going to use light blue on this. What color you use will depend on you and your customers. You have endless choices. You can use the same color or you can use a different color. I like to use contrasting colors, so that's why I went with a light blue with a royal blue. Once you've decided on your binding material, now let's look at thread color. I have light blue and royal, and I have lots of different thread colors I could use. So I just open up a little bit of each thread color and look to see what I think looks best. Many times it's just process of elimination that I use to decide which one I like and don't like. I don't like this one. It doesn't have a lot of oomph to me. This one is too light. These two are very similar, but I think I like this one better because it just has a drop more color. So that's how I decide which thread I'm going to use. I always use very light colored threads because I found that it looks better. I also use the same thread in the top and in the bobbin. This is because you can't always get them to be perfect. So if you used a dark color on the back and a light color on the front, you'd have pokies either on the front or the back of the opposite color. So make it easy on yourself and use the same color thread in the top and the bottom. I avoid dark colors because they just look really bad on the top of the quilt. The only time I'll use a darker color is if I'm doing an all black quilt or a quilt that has a lot of dark shirts. But if they have white or lighter colored shirts, I definitely stick with a pastel color.